Welcome back to Dev Dive episode 34. I'm your host, Nighthawk. Today's guest is Chris Tom, aka PWYFF, Head of Communications and Community at Theorycraft Games. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So part of the reason why I wanted to have you on is, one, we've had so many rioters on the show recently, and over the past years that we've been doing the show, I'm like, okay, we got to branch out from just rioters. This is a general game dev thing. Of course, the reason that I even know about you is from your time at Riot. You were at Riot for almost 7 years, 8 years?
8 years, yeah.
8 years, wow. But you've moved on. You've moved on to Theorycraft, which is, I've been doing a lot of research on Theorycraft recently. I even got into the Project Loki playtest, which I'm very excited about.
Oh, hell yeah.
So we can talk a little bit about your role right now at Theorycraft, and we can go in depth more later in the show. So what do you do as a head of community? Like, what does that do for the audience for a game?
So it's interesting because I think that this is a new role that is spinning up, and you're seeing it opening up at a lot of ex-Riot studios in particular, or folks who have had dealings with Riot, like worked at Riot and then spun off their own studio or went back to Blizzard, so on and so forth. Specifically, I think, one, there's this idea of like community as the relationship that you have on an ongoing basis with the players who play your game, and that's becoming more and more important. It's not just like, posting on forums and doing customer service. It's now about like, what is the conversation that you have? And so for me, joining Theorycraft, I was kind of like the first person in quote unquote marketing, but also just like community communications. And so at Theorycraft, my job has basically been pretty much everything. Like, we just actually had a head of marketing just join us, and so thank God we're now like two. But for my year that I've been at Theorycraft, it's been about setting up like whatever our social channels are, whatever our content strategy is, growing our community of playtesters, which I am definitely going to be shilling. And also, I think thinking about like long term, like how do we bring in influencers and creators and content creators and streamers to check out our game, build long lasting relationships. Thinking about positioning of our game, thinking about how we want to talk about our game to press as well, and what channels we want to use when it comes to even just straight up marketing our game. So it's kind of the whole entire gamut of how do we, as a studio and as a game developer and as a product making like the game that we're making, introduce and connect ourselves to the world.
It's really interesting that you bring up that this is a fairly new role to game dev, because the more I think about it, I think you're actually right. Where, like, in the past, there was always community managers and people who worked with the community, but I don't think it ever really was to the extent that you explained with your role. Like back in the day, I remember community managers mostly just being in charge of social media channels, mostly just being in charge of relaying information from the team to the community. But I think the role that you fill goes a lot further than that and expands a lot further out, which is really interesting when you try to relate it back to more traditional industries, because like you said, it's a marketing quote unquote role, but it's so much different than what traditional marketing may look like, which I think is one of the really, really fun parts of what game dev has done for the tech industry. They've put a huge spin on everything, where it's not just the same. You can't just take a role from like Facebook or something and put them all the way over into game dev. It's a completely different field.
One of the things I think is really interesting about the growth and change of the community management role, I think Riot to me has been a proprietor of that and like a pusher of that for like, I think they really, really changed the mindset of it. And what I think of in terms of like the epochs almost of like how marketing has changed or community has changed, I actually think Blizzard was sort of the first one to really change it, in that Blizzard, like 2 decades, 3 decades ago, was considered one of the most transparent and open game companies when they're making StarCraft or Warcraft, because they were using the channels that were available to them to engage with their audience, which was actually mostly press and journalists. But they were really, really open with press and journalists. They were talking to them about challenges, problems, whatever. And then eventually they tried forums, but I think there's a lot of fear around, which spokespeople do we want out there and whatnot. And so Blizzard kind of went from the cycle of like being the most out there game studio to suddenly Riot Games came out and they're like, everyone on social media, everyone can talk, do whatever you want, figure it out. And that change, I think, that paradigm shift was really critical, because I think the role of communications is really, how do you talk to your most engaged audience? And for a lot of other companies, your most engaged audience is actually your shareholders, or kind of like a customer base in some way. But these are people who have just bought the thing and they don't care about like the actual dialogue. But in gaming, when you play a game, you want to have a conversation. If you're the most engaged in a game, you want to know where the devs are bringing it, because you're so invested in like the mastery loop of this game. You want to know that the people who are iterating on it live, who are updating it, you want to trust them. And that means having this ongoing relationship and conversation. Like, do you actually know what you're doing? Do I share your philosophies? Do I believe in the vision of where you want to bring this thing? And so that's why I think this concept of community first and community merging with communications, and that whole entire craft coming from Riot, but then also expanding out, is a result of game studios who are like, we care about the relationship we have with our most important audience, which is our players. And the craft of that is not PR anymore. The craft of that is not like stakeholder, like shareholder management. The craft of that is specifically, how do you talk to an authentic audience about the game you're making? How do you share values? How do you share principles? How do you actually talk about patch notes or game vision?
Yeah, I think it's been incredible to see the shift in communications in games over the last decade. Even when I started the show in 2017, we've had a lot of hiatuses. That's why we're only on episode 34. When I started the show in 2017, one of the groundbreaking reasons for doing the show is because back then, even back in 2017, which is fairly recent, there weren't a lot of open communication channels between the people who actually make the game and the people who are playing the game. And something that I wanted to do is I wanted to give some more of the humanization side of people to see that, hey, these people who are making your game, it's not just a faceless company. It's not just a group of people. It's not even just a team of people. There are individuals who make up these people, key people on these teams who are making these decisions, and they're seeing what you're saying, and hopefully they're receiving that feedback in a positive way. And since we've started in 2017, I think, like you said, Riot has done an amazing job really humanizing their developers a lot more than I think most other game companies have really gone through.
Mm-hmm.
We have streamers at Riot. We have Riot devs who are streaming
Who
to
have gone
massive
since
audiences.
streaming. Yeah.
Just full-time content streaming, which is incredible. Some of my favorite streamers are Flox and Afik over on the balance team over at Riot, or sorry, the gameplay analysis team over at Riot, and they spend their whole time on their stream just answering questions from chat and being incredibly patient with some of the more caustic members of their community, and just being I don't really understand the level of patience they have for some of the questions they get. It's really inspiring to see them take time out of their free time to do stuff like that. So it's really cool to see that happening more and more, and I'd love to see it happen at more companies. So very excited to see what happens with Theorycraft.
It's very hard, is the thing that I'll say. I mean, that was like entirely my job when I joined Riot. I don't want. I'm not like, in the sense that when I joined Riot, Riot had adopted the philosophy of devs should, be communicating on forums, on social media. Forums, the vBulletin forums were probably the most popular at the time that I joined, which was 11 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. But at that time, I think even for Riot, they were like, we don't actually know the ramifications of this, in the sense of like, when you put your whole entire company on the forums, what happens? You get emotional burnout. You get people who like just insult people on the forums. They lose their patience. You get people who are seeking fame who join the company, who turn into streamers, and you're like, did you build that on your merit, or did you build that on the actual company? And I'm not using that to like kind of talk down on those people, but I do think like you attract a certain kind of person, and you really have to figure out, like, from a strategy perspective for the whole entire company, how do we actually embrace this and feel good about this? And that basically was actually the reason I got hired at Riot. Prior to, I was just like a journalist, and I was doing a lot of work around how do you connect devs to players and their communities. And when I joined Riot, it was like, okay, we do this, but it's a disaster all the time. like we are running from issue to issue. We're apologizing because we're saying something here and it's getting misquoted over here. And we need a lot of help in terms of how do we figure out how to like really scale this thing into what is like a modern day strategy around communications and community. Um, it's really, really hard. You have to prepare people emotionally. You have to create the right channels to communicate at scale. You can't just like shove a dev out and be like, hey, just go do the thing. But also you have to tap into a lot of natural energy, because some dev teams, you'll join them and they're really quiet. They're like, really, I just want to make the game. I want to hear feedback and I want to just work on this thing. Others, you have a dev who's like, put me on camera, let me go out there, let me start streaming, let me slog with them. And that energy, you have to harness it. You can't just like walk in and just say, hey, everyone, I'm going to put us on Twitch and then we're going to go on Twitter. We're going to do this thing. You have to like go with that, because in all honesty, for a lot of these devs, it's not their job. Like you've mentioned this is like how like they seem like naturally capable at this. Really, it's through a lot of sifting. You like walk through the whole dev team and you're like, who's interested in this? Like who gets energy from this? If you do get energy, how do we help you out with amplifying you, with training you, with doing stuff like that? But obviously at some point, if you like overtrain someone, maybe you lose that authenticity, or maybe they're there for the wrong reasons, or all this kind of stuff. Maybe they don't even want to say some of the things that you're like, hey, this would like, position the product in a really good way. And they're like, I don't want to say that shit. I want to tell them they're all fucking wrong. And you're like, well, okay, what do we do about that?
That's really funny. There is the pitfalls that you mentioned is something that I think probably a lot of people know implicitly just by thinking about it. But I think it's really important to voice those concerns, because they can cause issues. And Riot has had their share of public relations debacles in the past, and they've gotten through that pretty well, to give them credit. But I think that really goes to show that there is a lot more to it than, like you said, just getting a dev out there on camera or on Reddit or on Twitter and just letting them go wild.
Right.
So I don't envy the people who have to go through the scenes and try to balance authenticity with letting people just say whatever the heck they want, because some people will use and abuse that power.
Exactly.
So getting a little bit back on track, what made you think, and we talked a little bit about this in your last segment, but what made you think this is the job that I want to do?
I think for me, one is my whole entire career, it has been a lot of iteration on what gives me energy and joy. Like I wanted to be a writer growing up, but I come from like just like a very poor family, and so I think when you want to be a writer and you're poor, the first thing you're told is don't, because you can't make money. And so for me, it was about, well, then figuring out how do you leverage this love of communication or telling stories or empathy with others. And I tried a lot of things, actually. I did screenwriting, I did like essay ghostwriting, I did essay editing, I did copywriting, I did just general marketing, I went into journalism, blogging, things like that. And I think the thing that if I wasn't doing this, which I know is like kind of like a question that you were going to ask at some point, which is like, what would I do if I wasn't doing this? I really want to go into book publishing. I realized like after having done screenwriting and creative writing, I don't have the kind of the energy, I guess, or the vision to be like, I'm going to do my thing. But what I really wanted to do when I came out of college was, well, one of three tracks: journalism, book publishing, being a book editor, or this. And I think that this has probably been the most sustainable career that I've been able to develop. But book publishing, in all three, I think there's this idea of like, there are people who really want to talk with the world. And like they're like incredibly smart, but their ability to communicate their ideas is just lacking in some way, shape, or form. They see the world in some way and they don't know how to communicate that vision of the world to others. And that's like a really sad thing to me. When you want to write, I think it's about this empathy of connecting others to this like shared worldview. The first time that like I really didn't feel alone was when I read a book and I was like, holy shit, like someone feels this way. And they were able to tell me a story that articulated that feeling in a way that I felt. And the moment that happened, I was like, one, I want to do that. And I was like, okay, shit, I'm not really good at that. But then two, I am really good when someone walks in the room and they're like, hey, I want to do a thing. I I want to talk to these people about my intentions and my motivations. My execution might not be perfect, but my intentions are pure. And I would love if you helped me like maintain that purity of intention, because that's what actually helps people keep on doing what they're doing. Is not like, if I screw up, the thing that's painful is not people telling me like, hey, you screwed up, but it's that they misinterpret my intentions. They go, hey, you screwed up, you must hate me. And I go, no, I don't hate you, I just suck at what I'm doing. And having someone who's like, hey, I can help translate that, so that if they are mad at you, they can tell you, hey, you screwed up in the execution, I love the intention. And that connection and helping people actually stay connected to the world without shutting down, without feeling defensive, is really, really cool to me. And I didn't know that this was something that I was really excited about. I was like, book publishing is cool, journalism is cool. And I started working at Riot, and the first project I got put on was to basically write the patch notes. And specifically, I think that was when Riot was like, we need a new way to like deliver this kind of context. And so the idea we had was, let's share context on the patch notes. Let's actually like tell you why we're doing what we're doing. And I think that was the first time like anyone, at least at scale, had really adopted this methodology. And when I walked onto the team, I was like, hey, I'm going to start like telling them the reasons why you're doing it. And all of them were like, we don't actually want to put our names on it. Because they're like, that's really fucking scary to be like, I'm nerfing this thing, and everyone's like, look in his match history, check him out, do all this kind of shit. And so being able to be like, hey, I'll just write this thing, and then I'm going to go to each and every one of you, and I'm going to spit back to you like a little paragraph that I think is funny and witty, but also represents what you're trying to get to. And hopefully you'll feel representative of that. And what happened from there was that I think like a lot of devs were like, cool, that is exactly what I intend to do, and tell them that. And then they get punched. Like the players would be like, that's a stupid fucking reason. But at least the dev would be like, okay, I understand how to change my worldview. I'm a little bit detached from this. I still believe in like the grand vision of the thing, but clearly there's some feedback. And this idea that you get to work with all these people and they get to learn and grow and do all that kind of stuff is really fun to me. And that's the thing that I think I'm really enjoying now, is like game development is so collaborative. It's the most collaborative like career and craft and industry that you can have. Everyone has to contribute to the stew. And so this feeling that as somebody who's not like, I'm not a developer, I'm not like, I don't work in code, I don't do any of this, but like that I can contribute through the act of what are you all trying to do and say, is just really fun.
Yeah. There's actually like a few things I want to unpack there. I want to start with what we ended on, where you said like, oh, I'm not a developer, I don't work in code. That is also another one of the things that we based this podcast off of when I first started. I one of my core beliefs, and one of the beliefs of Larry, who helped start this show, was that you don't have to be somebody who is sitting at a computer writing engineering code all day to be called a game developer. I think we really believed that anybody who works and contributes towards the vision of the game, whether that's in communications, accounting, marketing, engineering, QA, they're all developers. And I think that's something that I've tried to push a lot over the past 3 years. And I'm happy, obviously from no contribution to me, but I'm happy to see that I think more people are comfortable referring to themselves as game developers, or referring to other people as game developers, even if they're not sitting there and scripting out stuff like that every day, which is really cool.
I have a personal thing, which is like, one, I agree. I think holistically, in like, I believe myself as a game creator. Like, I think that I contribute to the value and the enjoyment of a game experience. Personally, I will say that like, I don't think of myself. It is actually more on like a nitpick of like the word itself. I think like what people, when they're like, I want to be known as a game developer, it has to do with more like credit. I want to be given credit that I've contributed. I'm like, absolutely. Like anyone who helps build the vision of this game is contributing to that game. They are a game creator. I think of developer as kind of people who work specifically in the development of the game itself. But I know that that's probably like, I think by picking that line, I'm probably like drowning a whole lot of like gains around credits and being able to like feel involved and like a part of the group. So I won't hold that line.
No, it's personal. I think personal belief is 100% valid in whatever way you want to take that. I think this really just goes to show of title inadequacies in tech and game dev in general. My title for what I do is I'm a trust and safety specialist, which doesn't really tell you anything about what I do, and that can mean a number of different things depending on what I'm working
Right.
on. And I think at the end of the day, if you're going to just have like a little elevator pitch for your role, it needs to be something that at least tells people what you're working on. But I actually think game creator does a better job at that than game developer.
Hmm.
Um, I just don't know how widespread that is outside
Right.
of like
Yeah.
this very niche
I totally
field
agree. I
of
think
people.
game developer is the general lexicon of you've contributed to the game. And that's like, that's language. And so I'm like, I think of myself in that definition totally as a game developer. And I think that anyone who, works in the team to bring this thing to market, totally a game developer.
Definitely. Bringing it back a little bit to what you said at the beginning of that tangent, I really liked how you brought up the fact that there are some incredibly intelligent people out there who just may not be the best communicators and may not be really good at communicating their craft, because I think the public may have a general misconception on intelligence, where they see somebody who's very well spoken, or they see somebody who has a very charismatic personality, and not saying that they aren't intelligent, but using that as the only metric of intelligence. Whereas I think some of the most intelligent people I know have just abysmal social skills, and they just have no way to really communicate what they're thinking effectively, at least to a wider audience. Like, they can communicate very effectively to people who know what they're talking about, but
Hmm.
maybe not to people who have no context on what they're saying.
This is
So
the thing I will just say is like, I think is a big struggle around like social media and things like that is like, there's just such a specific like conformation for how you need to look, do, act, or whatever in order to be perceived as successful or smart or whatever contributing. And I do think like that's such a terrible thing to exist in, because I think in this idea, it's the same reason I think that people sometimes are like, sometimes people want to write because they want to create what's inside of them. I think other people want to write to like connect with others. This feeling that like you can't connect with people because like on a systemic level, you don't meet the height bar in order to contribute is like devastating. And so having people, I think, who genuinely care about, hey, you have an opinion and that opinion is like valuable is just like, I think, really important to me.
yeah, and I think the anonymity of the internet, at least in its early days, did a lot to. I mean, it did a lot of terrible things. Let's be fully honest, but it
Yeah.
did a lot to um, sort of give people more of an outlet to express themselves without fearing repercussions based on what they looked like, what they sounded like, how they communicated, as long as they had decent writing skills. But of course, that bar is there's got to be a bar somewhere.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting to see somebody who has a different perspective on how to liaison with that aspect of people, more than just working on, like you said, conforming to what society may think is the most attractive thing at the moment. Another thing I wanted to touch on that you said is, you said you were interested in book publishing. This is a field I know less than nothing about. I consume a lot of books, but I'm mostly a fiction person. Were you referring to nonfiction?
I wanted to work in fiction. So the story I have is, it's funny because I went to school for journalism, and then the very last second, I was basically told by all of my professors, "You should not be in journalism. Like, this thing does not pay, and there's no careers here."
That's
And
got
the
to be
whole entire field is
depressing.
getting, yeah, because they were just like, when I was entering university in like early 2000s, um, we were just on this cusp of, do you need a master's in journalism in order to actually be a journalist? And when I was going through college, the answer was basically becoming no, because the internet, blogging, and everything like that. Like, the answer might have been yes, you need a master's in journalism to work at like a prestigious outlet. But throughout the whole entire time in my education, they were just saying like, we're getting pummeled by the BuzzFeeds, the Huffington Post, all that kind of stuff. Um, and so last second, I was like, maybe I'll pivot to book publishing. And so I tried learning book publishing. I moved to Toronto. I was in Canada at the time. I got to the final stage of interview at Penguin to be an assistant editor on their nonfiction, and literally the guy calls me and he's like, "Get out." He's like, "You
Damn.
should not be in this industry." He's like, "Nothing, not
Oh,
to be
okay.
mean." It wasn't in a mean way, but he was basically like, "Listen, one, this is an entry level position that pays like well below what standard entry level is. Two, your competition all has 10 plus years in the industry, but they have nowhere else to go. And three, he was like, book publishing is dying. Like the act of editing, even fiction, nonfiction, whatever, all it is right now is a platform to getting into transmedia, getting into television series, adaptations, whatever. But at the end of the day, he's like, the idea that you have around like trying to help authors, connect with the world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And you have to think about the next 40 years of your career. And he's like, I don't think you should be in this industry. Um, I want it to be a nonfiction. I think I just like I love like magical realism is kind of my favorite genre. Although I'm getting more and more into sci-fi. I think like William Gibson. I finally started reading Gibson, and like he's fucking blowing my mind. I have hated actually sci-fi for the longest time, but things like Murakami, Salman Rushdie, like these guys, I think there's just something like really incredible about the depth of their writing that I really wanted to like contribute to and help find more of.
One, I love science fiction. That's been my favorite genre forever. So I'm glad that you're finally warming up to it. I actually haven't.
I'll take any recommendations, by the way.
I'm currently listening to the Red Mars trilogy, which is by, let me double check the author. I'm a big audiobook guy. I just love listening to books when I'm either working or trying to go to sleep. It's by Kim Stanley Robinson. Excellent. This genre, I think it's mostly called like rational fiction, where it's like it's science fiction, but it's based on technology that we can sort of reasonably understand.
I see.
That it's this
like
is
acceptable like, fiction almost. Yeah.
And this was these were actually written back in like the 80s or something, and so they're based in like the 2040s. So like the stuff that they're talking about was predicted fairly well. I think it's a really interesting series. It's very character driven, which is less common for science fiction, at least the books that I've read. But it's really good so far. I'm enjoying it.
Okay, I'll look into that.
Depending on your tastes, I have so much science fiction. I love it. There's Andy Weir obviously does very good entry level science fiction with The Martian and his newer book Project Hail Mary, which I think is an excellent read. But it definitely is more of like, it feels more like a young adult novel, which is not a diss towards it, but it's just a different style of book.
Yeah.
I
read the 3-body problem. I like slammed it on a flight from LA to New York during the worst turbulence that like I'd ever gone through. Like New York was kind of like in like kind of a quasi hurricane, and I had nightmares because like the 3-body problem is like deeply existential, and I was just like blazing through it while this plane is going fucking crazy, and then I just couldn't sleep for like a week thereafter. I just had like nightmares the whole time.
One of the scariest books I've ever read, the Shrike Saga. What's the Hyperion?
I've had recommendations. I have not read.
It's really, really good, but it's so different from most of the books that I've read that it's kind of hard to recommend to people who haven't really gotten into the genre yet. It's like science fiction mixed with fantasy, mixed with sort of like what you were saying, like a very existential, almost philosophical point of view on the world. It's super interesting, and it's just the last portion of the book, the last act, just goes off the rails so hard that if you're listening to it in audiobook form, it's just like, is this the same?
Am I in the wrong book?
What the hell is going on? It's super interesting. The later books are also really good, but I don't think they hit quite as hard as Hyperion does. So definitely give that a listen or a read if you're interested. It's super
good record.
It's very cool. It's very different from anything that I've read in the genre. So I think it has a lot of impact just from that. But not to make this a book recommendation podcast as much as I'd love that to be. There was one other tangent that I wanted to go off on, but I totally forgot it was. So we've talked about this quite a bit, but I want to just get it officially out there. Do you have any other interests and hobbies outside of gaming that you want to talk about?
Gaming, reading, writing. I really like live music, just like generally. I think I'll never be a musician, but I just love the idea that like all these people get out of their house and get together and like dance and throw away inhibitions and just listen to someone who's like put a lot of effort into creating this live experience that like in all honesty can't scale. Like, you know, you have sometimes they do a stadium, but sometimes like just sitting in a small little venue and just seeing like these people go up on stage and put their heart out every single time is like it's just really cool. And I think like I love all the way from like giant music festivals to smaller intimate things. Like I just love this idea of seeing all these people who like genuinely love a thing coming together to just like hang out, vibe, listen to the thing, do the thing. That's probably honestly like my major ones. I think that gaming consumes so much of my life. Like there's just like I'm constantly gaming, and it's something that I didn't think that I would have. Like I think a lot of people kind of told me growing up, it's like you'll grow out of this or whatever. I just love it. I just love the idea of like connecting with my friends. I love even playing like individual things. I think the thing that I vibe with really deeply around Theorycraft is like our whole entire goal, just at a top level, is like one, games that you can play socially, like that you can bring your friends in together and you can have adventures and stories you can play into the night. And then two, games are inherently about mastery, about like you invest this time over and over into a thing that is really critical. Like I played ice hockey for 8 years when I was in Canada, and the physical act of like skating, shooting, like training yourself in this way is so gratifying. And I'm like, why not do that for your brain and your hand-eye coordination? And that's games. And to me, I think that's the thing that I just really love about the thing. And so I'm like, I'm just kind of like, it's a huge part of my life. So
yeah, I think some of the things that you mentioned there, like bringing friends in, that really harkens back to like the old days of gaming for me when I was just starting out on League, and I joined. I think my first game of League of Legends, my friend brought me in, and I had only ever really played games like Combat Arms or Battlefield before, so it was a entirely huge pivot into the
paradigm shift.
Yeah. So I was awful, of course, and of course this was back when the servers were in California, so I was also playing on one like 80 ping or something ridiculous. And I think one of the first things I said was, man, you have to spend a lot of time to get good at this game. You have to spend a lot of time. I was playing like Blitzcrank bot or something, and he was playing Kha'Zix, or no, Kha'Zix wasn't even out back then. I don't even remember. And that was it really did feel like something different to me at the time. Like going from a game like an FPS to a game like League was such a different shift, and it really had that appeal where it's like, man, I could get really good at this game if I played a lot with my friends.
Yeah.
And so many late hours into the night playing 3v3s, playing custom 1v1s on the proving grounds back before it was the Howling Abyss. Yeah, just a lot of great memories like that. So if you can create that experience again for a new generation of gamers, or even some of the old generations of gamers, that would be amazing.
That's our goal. Yeah,
that's something that I think not a lot of games can do well these days.
Yeah, totally agree.
So let's take things back, way back to talk about your education. So we've already talked a little bit about this. You were in journalism school, but let's talk about what your degree is in and why you decided to get it.
So I have a double major in English and communications. I studied at Simon Fraser University. That's up in Vancouver. Specifically, I wanted to keep my options open around, like, I wanted to be a writer, so I needed to learn, I think, a little bit more about like just like what goes mechanically into like writing. And then I splashed journalism and mass communications specifically. Mass communications, I think, was just kind of like I got lucky. I'll be honest, like mass communications, studying mass comms has been the most helpful thing, or was the most helpful thing to me. But communications in and of itself has evolved so dramatically since I was in school that I would say that my college experience now is pretty much like defunct. Two things though that it did help me with. One, it taught me discipline. Like I was a guy entering college who was just like skip classes all the time. I did a lot of online courses, but I think when it came to writing, I had never been like really hit hard. I entered college, I wrote a shitty essay, I got like a C minus, and I was like, wow, I can't like coast at all. And then eventually I learned to like, how do you adapt your voice? And that was when I started, I think, to get better at it. So college taught me a lot of discipline, I would say. And then two, I think it just taught me about like the underpinnings and the mechanisms by which we communicate on a mass scale, and how certain things just influence the way that people perceive those messages. Obviously, it was like at a different time, and we were studying a different thing. But I think this idea that there are, philosophies around even the concept of memes or anything like that was definitely very helpful. And then how do you write a story from a journalistic perspective, I think was also very helpful, because at the very least it gave me a idea of how you write from a different voice, a different lens. And then finally, it was helpful because it helped me immigrate down to America. You can't immigrate down here. I'm on a green card now, but like getting an H1 visa was probably one of the most difficult things of my life. One, I'm not a very organized person, and so getting all of my like papers in order to immigrate to another country and work was incredibly stressful, because I was like, at some point, I know I'm going to miss like a thing, a deadline, a piece of paper, whatever, and I'm not going to have it, and they're just going to reject me. And that almost happened, but then like basically at some point they pulled through, and I got to work at Riot, and then got my green card during my tenure there, and so now I'm very grateful for that at the very least.
And back then, they made, I don't know, I've never immigrated, so I can't speak to it very very well, but I've heard from other people that it seems like game dev has become more acceptable to the immigration officers, to be like, hey, I'm coming down to work in game dev. Were they giving you any trouble back then, where they're like,
oh man,
this isn't a real industry, you can't move here to work on that?
Especially when it comes to community and communications. I came down kind of in under communications, and I think that what was helpful was like my mass comms degree and my journalistic background is like, so when you have an H1B visa, you have to prove like kind of that this candidate is like one of the rare candidates. They have a background, they have a training experience that only they can do, and we have, quote unquote, as a company, tried to hire within America, and we couldn't. And so that was definitely really scary. I think when they first offered me my job at Riot, the government, like the US government, rejected me. They were just like, we need more evidence. And so I had planned to move down to LA, and then Riot was like, get out of here. And then Diablo 3 launched, so I got to play D3 for like a couple of months while we figured all this stuff out. And I had to get like references, I had to get letters from professors who were like, this is why, this background, this journalism degree, all this kind of stuff helps. And then eventually the government was like, all right, you can come down here.
Damn, that's a huge pain in the ass.
Scared the shit out of me, let me tell you. So
yeah, I hope that process isn't as difficult now, but I'm sure it's still a huge pain in the ass.
I've actually heard it's gotten worse.
Really?
I think H1 visas are like one of the rarest thing. I didn't know that coming in, but they're like expended a lot for like engineering people coming overseas and things like that. And so they're just like, they're the only way and the only path for non-Americans to get into specifically American citizenship. Everyone else can kind of work only at that company for a temporary amount of time, but an H1B allows you to get a green card, which then you can translate and then into something else, and then you can also just become an American citizen. So it's crazy, actually. I like big shout out to the immigration lawyers at Riot. They did a lot for me. So
yeah, I'm sure they get a lot of practice doing that, getting people moving over. One of the guests that I'm hoping to have on the show, Dan Honks, who is a security engineer at Riot. He just emigrated from Scotland to LA, and I know he was having trouble getting his visa for the longest time. And I think eventually he said something that the lawyers at Riot helped him out. So that was that was a huge process for him, and I'm sure if we ever get to have him on the show, he'll have a good story about that. So journalism and mass communications. A lot of people I talk to in game dev, they don't put a lot of weight into their degrees themselves. How do you think your education has prepared you for your job, what you do right now?
I think discipline was definitely the biggest thing. Like you were working with people who don't give a shit about you. Your professors don't give a shit. Your TAs don't. You still have to show up. Um, I would also say that my outside of college. So during that time, I had to work in order to make tuition. And a friend of mine started an essay editing company, and so I basically was like, all right, if you pay me on a per essay basis, how many essays do I need to edit to like basically make all this money? And so I edited a ton of essays and just got really good, I think, in terms of like both copy editing, voice, flow, things like that. And then every now and then someone would be like, I need help ghostwriting this part of my essay. And one of the things I thought was really fun was I would like read their old essays and then I would write a portion of it and be like, put it in their voice. And I'm like, there's no way you're going to get an A because you are a C plus student at best. And so I'm going to get you a C plus and hopefully we'll be in this area. And I think it was good just to see how far I think my procrastination abilities as like a kid got tested. I think very few get the ability to like actually get that really like hard honed with deadlines with stuff like that during college. I think a lot of people either drop out or they just like skate by in some way. But for me, I think like because it was my whole entire living and my existence, like this feeling of you got to learn to manage your shitty procrastination abilities or else you're just gonna like you're gonna die out here. So that was helpful.
Yeah, I really like hearing about people's college's experience because my college experience, I never went to like a full university. I just went to a community college, and I had no interest in like making it work for me. And I think that was part of the reason why I never really enjoyed it is because I think you only really get out what you put in.
Yeah.
And you can spend as much money on the most expensive college you want in the world, but if you're not willing to put in the effort yourself and at least get something out of it, then I don't think you'll really get anything. You won't get your money's worth, that's for sure. But
Yeah.
I love the common thread here from the guests I've talked to, where it was like more of the experience of working with other people, forming that self discipline, getting more and more experience working in the quote unquote real world that has done
Yeah.
more to shape their career than the classes themselves, which I think is I don't know if that speaks to the effectiveness of college, but I think it at least gives it more merit to be like, hey, this is going to be some of your real world experience, so you might as well try and make it work for you.
One thing that I think was interesting for me was definitely that like professors, especially at SFU, a lot of them kind of came from the field. They were like externalists or whatever. And what it taught me actually was they knew some things, but they didn't know nearly as much as like I thought that they would know, if that makes sense. Like I think when you're in high school, you're trained to believe like my teachers are like everything. And then you go to college and like some old professor just comes in and he just like, listen, you're all fucked. Like this thing sucks, this thing sucks. I have no answer for this thing, but I'm gonna teach you to the best of my abilities. And you immediately like realize like, oh, we now have to chart the course of the next wave of whatever the hell this thing is. And I think nothing was more true than in journalism and mass communications when all these professors who had come from very traditional like journalism backgrounds were coming in and telling us, I have no idea what BuzzFeed is going to do to the industry, what Fox News is going to do to the industry, what Huffington Post is going to do to the industry. But let me tell you, you're all in trouble. And just that, like, I remember hearing that and being like, wow, nobody knows. That's cool.
I love that you talk about that because I think that's one of the big life lessons of growing up in general is when you're a
Yeah.
kid you kind of believe that the adults know everything, they know what's going on. And then when you finally get to the adulthood stage, you're like, okay, there's a lot of dumb people out there who don't know what the hell's going on. And even the smart people really don't know what's going on everywhere. So it gets a lot to learn that, hey, you kind of just have to figure out what you're doing as you go and hopefully not screw it up too bad.
Yeah, right. Your fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. So what do you think you would recommend somebody trying to get into your role today? They would take the same route, do the same sort of education?
If their desired studios are in America, honestly, I think not. The main reason I say that is, and this is actually I think true, and we say this a lot at Theorycraft across almost every discipline, game design, art, engineering, marketing, everything, is the market is moving almost too fast for a structured curriculum to keep up. And also, we're in a passion-based industry. Like the idea that you can go on a track and then get spit out and then get into a thing is really hard in a passion-based industry unless you are exemplary, unless you're like top 1 to 10%. And so all of those things I think add up to going into school, unless you're planning to beat the shit out of it, like hustle your ass off, get internships, like do everything, then it's honestly better off to figure out how do I just get this experience as soon as possible? Because the thing you need to test more than anything is your grit. I think the thing that I hear from the thing that I tell to everyone is what matters the most is just how much you push on this thing. And there's going to be times where like it sucks, it doesn't manifest in anything, but like you have to keep on pushing because in this industry, like that's the only thing that actually matters. When I look at resumes, when we hear from people, a lot of people are waiting for permission to do the thing. They're like, hey, how do I get a job so that I can finally begin designing games? And they're like, I get home from my other job, I'm tired, I can't do this stuff. It sucks, but actually at the end of the day, there are people who still do that. They like maybe they have the resources and the means to just do projects, to spike things, to volunteer for stuff 24/7. But the fact is that they're doing that, and there's a lot of them out there. And so it's kind of like it sucks to say, but it's like if you want to get into this industry, you have to be willing to push, and you have to kind of also accept that sometimes it won't pay out, but you just have to push regardless because the skill you need to train as soon as fucking possible is I got to do stuff, I got to get experience, and I got to prove that I'm willing to be self-motivated. I say that a lot because like to give an example, when I was at Riot, we had an internship pipeline for basically this like communications role, and we had like hundreds of applicants. And then at that point, I had just kind of joined the team, and I had inherited the role. And I'm like, actually, I don't think that we have the bandwidth to be able to run this internship program. So I had to shut the whole entire thing down. But for everyone who was in the next stage of interviews, I was like, you know what? I'm going to just actually do kind of like a fake interview with them and then let them know, but then also offer like direct mentorship if they wanted to get any like advice, insight, connections, whatever. Cause I'm like, you're clearly talented enough to have advanced to this stage. I'd love to help you. And I talked to probably about 50 people and offered this idea of like, just reach out if you need anything. Only one person did. Of every single other person, I'm not saying like I'm a great connection or you should always take advantage of this or whatever, but like of all of those people, only one person was like, hey, I would love to every, like half a year or so, check in with you, get some advice, get some support, do whatever. That person is now working in the industry. And everyone else who's in that pipeline, I don't know if they're working in the industry. Maybe they felt like they didn't want to intrude. Maybe they didn't want to, do any of this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like, that's the thing I think I'm talking about is like, you have to be willing to push. And sometimes it does get uncomfortable, but like, this is kind of what you're dealing with because even when I'm sorting through entry-level applicants, it's thousands of people. And of those thousands of people, 90% of them are like, I'm working this other job and I would love permission to work in games. And 10% of them are like, I'm working this job and I'm volunteering here and I'm doing this thing. I want to work in games. I'm working in games. Give me my fucking shot.
Okay, so I want to break down a lot of what you just said. So I'm going to say a lot of things, and feel free to refute any of them, because I don't want to misrepresent anything that you said. So my perspective on game dev, and I've never worked directly with game dev, but I've been doing the show for a long time, and I get to talk to a lot of awesome people. And I'd like to hear your response to this to hopefully bring some light back to the world. My perspective on game dev is one, generally speaking, it's not the highest paid industry for most roles that have equivalents in other industries, especially tech, because tech is historically very well paid. Two, it's very difficult to get into. You have to be very much on top of your game in both a professional sense and sometimes in your soft skills as well, depending what your industry is. Three, turnover and burnout is incredibly high, more so than in almost any other industry other than maybe directly entertainment. and not just turnover, hopping around. Like I think something that I've seen a lot of is game devs directly change projects or studios once every 2 to 3 years on average, which is ridiculously high compared to some people who've been working at the same role or at the same company for 20 or 30 years. So why do people choose game dev with all these negatives?
And I will tell you, one, you're right. Yes to all the things that you just said. And then two, honestly, because this is the medium that gives us joy. Like, I think that people choose this, and this is why I say passion-driven industry is like, don't get into this unless you're intrinsically motivated to work in games. If you're extrinsically motivated, i.e. you want to have recognition, you want the salary, you want the stability, you want all these things, like, that's hard. That's really difficult. And they're very rare. Those roles are out there, but they're very rare. But you have to love games. And then you also have to love, beyond loving games, because I'm like, that's a requisite, but you have to love what you do in games. And this is like, I think a thing that a lot of people miss is like, sometimes I get a ton, I would say actually about 90% of cover letters are also, I love these games. I would give anything to work at Riot Games or Theorycraft Games or wherever. And that's not enough, like, because at the end of the day, everyone does love games and they want a chance. The other half of it is like, you need to love a thing that you want to contribute to the studio, whether it's like, for me, I love helping connect developers to players. I love growing communities that are inclusive, that actually allow for the exchange of ideas so that we can make a better experience. That thing is what drives me. And so I will always get better at that thing. Even if nobody hires me, I will spend every single day trying to understand what makes communities tick, such that if I ever work at a game studio again, which I would love to work at a game studio, I would want to help bring that value to them. And so to me, it's about like, if you work in games, you got to have a sense of purpose. I think that's probably like the most critical thing that you need to have. You need to like love games and have this sense of purpose of what you want to bring to the game industry. There are ways that you can work at other studios, but like, I'm telling you kind of, I think my idealistic perspective, and I'm really lucky. Like I get to work at Riot Games for 8 years. I got to work at like Improbable, which I think is a really fun insight into tech. I get to work at Theorycraft Games with a lot of people who I really admire. And so I know that like I get to speak from a place of privilege, to be honest. And I think that there's, a survivor bias that a lot of people have when they look at their whole life story and they're like, I must have manifested this. I got really fucking lucky. Like I had a lot of little lucky junctures that got me to where I am. And my break even into Riot, though, like I got hit by a car to get into Riot. I was working at a coffee shop
for a second.
I was working a coffee shop job for like a year and a half. And because like when I got rejected from Penguin, I was like, I have no fucking job now. And so I had to make rent. I wrote freelance, but I like got paid like a couple $100 a month. And I had to work at a coffee shop job for a year and a half. And I just had to like, I remember one day, like I'm just sitting in my room going like, this could be my life. Like I could just be doing this and that would be the end of that. And it's like, well, you just have to hope you get lucky. And my form of lucky was I got hit by a car and I got workers' comp. And so I couldn't like,
oh, you actually did get hit by a car.
I couldn't work for like 6 months.
For a second.
I couldn't work for 6 months. And so at the place that I was writing at, I was like, listen, I have more time because I can't physically work. I'm just going to, whatever you want to do, like whatever projects you need, whatever things that I can write, let me fucking write them. And then my editor-in-chief at the time was quitting. And he was like, hey, you've been actually like stepping up. I think that you should take on this role. That was my break. And then I worked in that role for about a year. And then Riot was like, hey, we see what you're doing. You should come down here. That like, I might not have gotten that. I probably wouldn't have gotten that, to be honest, if I didn't like just this series of lucky events. And so but I can say, like, I think for my place of privilege is my like reverse engineered story is I hope everyone continues to push. I realize that not everyone's going to get hit by a car and get their lucky break. I wish and hope that not everyone has to get hit by a car to get their lucky break. But also I will say that like now that I'm in this position to hire, to mentor or whatever, I hope that people realize that like pushing is actually the only thing that they can manifest in the world. The only agency you have in the world is really how hard do I go? And that sucks to say because I think in like a hustle culture, I think it does it's a weird thing to promote, but it's not like about burn yourself out. It's like find your purpose and get really fucking good at it and push.
And for legal reasons, I just want to clarify. Chris is not advocating that you get hit by a car and put yourself in a position where you do get hit by a car.
I'm not advocating at all.
Just want to be clear.
Yeah, be very clear. Do not do any of that.
That's a very interesting way of putting it. And I think your story is probably similar to a lot of people's, maybe not the specifics, but the generalizations, where it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of passion, and it takes a lot of luck. And I think that's just one of the things that I mean, you hear it from people, especially from like people in the entertainment industry. It's like, oh, I'm incredibly lucky to be here. But you don't hear the stories from the 1,000 people who it didn't work out.
Yep.
And I think that's something that survivorship bias is definitely the correct way to phrase it. It's just, you need to be cognizant that no matter how much work you put in, no matter how much effort you do, it's no guarantee. It's not a one-to-one input where the amount of work you put in equals the amount of stuff you get out.
Right.
So you need to be very, very cognizant of that before you decide that it's what you want to spend all of your effort on.
Yep.
So before joining Theorycraft, we've hinted about this a bit. Let's talk a bit about your roles at the other companies you were at. Starting with there was one other role before this, but I think it wasn't as relevant to game dev as the other ones. Your role at the essay company.
So my whole entire start of my career actually was I blogged about World of Warcraft. There was a period of time where I was playing World of Warcraft competitively, and Arena had just launched, and so I started up a blog because I was like, I need to start writing and putting stuff out there. And the blog got fairly popular, and then I managed to parlay that into a writing job at Alakazam, which is now Fanbyte. But Alakazam owns like Wowhead, Thoughtbot, whatever, and they did a lot of like MMORPG editorial coverage, and so I got on as like a staff writer for them. And then from there, I stuck with that for like a number of years, and then became editor-in-chief of that site for about a year, and then joined Riot as their head of, like, basically their communications guy for the live balance team. I wrote their patch notes for about 2 to 3 years, and then took over as like, I kind of actually, one of the things I've done, I think, is created a lot of roles for myself. So at the time, Riot didn't have anything in communications, and community was actually pretty hard capped at where I was. And so at that, when I was kind of doing my thing, I was like, you know what, we actually need a communication strategist for the whole entire gameplay initiative to talk about like the reasons that we're doing the things that we're doing. And so I grew into that, and then I pitched another role, which is called communications lead for League of Legends, specifically in this idea of like, how do people know long-term the vision of this company or this product? And I was like, hey, I want to actually pick up that job. So that was actually one of the funnest, I think, teams that I've ever worked on, because we, that was when we announced Overwatch had just come out and was beating the shit out of League. And everyone was like,
it's looking at Jeff.
And they were looking at Jeff Kaplan, and they're like, this guy is out there and he's so connected. And Riot actually had like never done video or done much like direct video communications at that time. And they're like, we need to spin up a thing to figure out like, how do we get back into that relationship? And so that was actually when we started spinning up the Riot Pleases with Joe Tung. Got Mark and Brandon back on like camera. We did like a lot of stuff that was basically around like, how do we talk as a company with our entire player base? And so I got to do that. And then I switched over to esports to help them. And then I got switched over to Valorant to help launch Valorant. And then after that, I think Riot to me kind of grew really, really big, really fast. And I think there's just like a number of reasons I wanted to really try something new. But when you get to a really, really big org, I think the organization starts to look internally. It's hard to really stay focused on the players. You start like getting consumed by like, how do we do the thing well and efficiently? And I think that Riot still has like incredible soul. I believe in a lot of people over there, but it was a very, very big endeavor, I think. And so I joined Improbable because the head of publishing for Riot went over to Improbable, and Improbable was trying to spin up game studios. And so I was really excited about that, and I wanted to work on something new and build a whole entire team. But their games did not do very well. And so I think it taught me a lot about the function of community, communications, marketing, things like that. But I think I realized very quickly, like if you don't build a strong core around like a strong fun game, I think it's really hard to do much of anything else. And we just couldn't find the spark, especially for a game like I think we launched Scavengers, and then we're working on another game that spun out and actually has just been announced, Nightingale, the survival MMO. They are now their own studio, and so after about a year, I decided it was time to like get away from. It felt like almost too tech. I realized I'm not a big fan of tech in and of itself. And so Theorycraft reached out, and then I've been here for about a year, year and a half.
So I want to drill down a little bit more into those. You gave a great summary, but I'd love to talk a little bit more about the specifics. So Fanbyte, you started as a staff writer. You started as writing essays about World of Warcraft, which is amazing. What time frame was this? When in the WoW history was this?
Ooh, so this was just mid TBC. I want to say like because Wrath of the Lich King was after TBC. I burned out after TBC, and I became a generalist like MMO reviewer. And so around I don't know when this was, but like season 4, let's say, of Burning Crusade, I had joined. Like I said, maybe season 3, and I was just doing like broad like MMORPG coverage, reviews, things like that, and I was doing that for a number of years.
So for those of us who may not
be sorry, let me find a date
with WoW. That's, I think, as much as I think it might be like 2006, 2007. Does that sound right?
I want to say, let's see. So I joined them 2009.
Okay.
Was when I joined them. So yeah, a little bit later. I think, actually, wait, was that right? Oh, I think I might have changed my dates. I joined them when I was in the middle of college. I think 2 years, 1 year into college. And I graduated 2009. So yeah, I think around 2008, 2007 was when I joined them. And then I was just kind of contributing.
Did you balance this with the other work that you're doing on essays, or did you sort of just like say?
Yeah. So basically I was tutoring and then working like a clothing retail shop, folding baby clothes, and then essay editing, and then blogging and writing for this site. And then I tried splashing in like my later years into like screenwriting.
So you were really grinding with the energy that only a college student can have, burning the candle at 7 different ends. Did you find that took any toll on you, stress related?
Yeah. I mean, I think I feel really lucky in that, like, as an individual, I'm not like, I don't carry a lot of stress. Like, I think I'm a very laissez-faire kind of person, and so I think that really helped me. But 2, I was really scared, I think, because I had just come out of high school with like no career, like no concept of career. And both of I just come from a poor family. And so this idea of like, I had no guardrails. I had no rails even. This idea of like, I had just entered what would be the final 4 years dictating the trajectory of like my life. And I had this like incredible, wasn't anxiety, but this huge pressure of like, you better figure something out, because if you don't, like, looking around at your family, like you might just end up in a hole, and there's no one who's going to pull you out of that hole. And so I think that kind of pushed me to just be like, listen, you want to write? If you ever want to like write for your life or your career, you'd better hone that. And you'd better get like really good at figuring out how to commercialize that in some way, shape, or form, or else you're just going to work something else, and you're going to only be able to write when you get like home after your job. But I can't even do that. I'm just too tired sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that really speaks to the idea that there's not going to be always somebody, especially in fields like game dev, there's not always going to be somebody who's going to be advocating for you. You have to advocate for yourself pretty heavily. And that is not just like going to say like embellishing your resume or like talking yourself up to in an interview. That also means like you have to really grind and put that effort into to make what you're saying actually true, and not just BS about it on your interview or your resume.
Yeah.
So going from a more casual like staff writer to the editor in chief of this organization. First of all, how big at the time? Do you know how big Fanbyte was in terms of like, people
Fanbyte,
working?
grand total, I want to say like 20, 30. We had an offsite in Vegas before I even left, and Tencent had just acquired Fanbyte. And it was really funny was because Tencent was a majority shareholder in Riot. And so even before when Riot had given me an offer, I didn't tell my boss, but my boss knew because Tencent had to ask for permission to swap me over. But yeah, I managed kind of like a small staff writing team of like 5 people, a copywriter, and then a couple like kind of junior writers that we paid like a couple $100 a month to just like stick on random projects for MMOs.
And then going from there, did you apply to Riot, or did they basically reached out and headhunted you?
So Riot reached out. There was one old EIC that I had worked with at Alakazam or Fanbyte. He went to Riot to be kind of one of their community guys. His name is Tamit or Andrew Beagle. And when Riot was spinning up this new team, they called it Arming Our Advocates. People who work at Riot will get a kick out of that name, but like it eventually transformed into player relations. But Arming Our Advocates was this, like, for them, a revolutionary idea around how do we connect with our community, talk with them. And so they had just started the team, and then Andrew reached out and was like, hey, you do basically this on the journalism side. Do you want to come and join this team? And so I was like, all right, let's throw a resume in.
And this was really pretty early on in League of Legends. I think I saw on your LinkedIn around 2013. So that's like season 3.
Yeah, 2-3 basically. When I came in, I got slammed onto like what was the second seasonal update that they were working on, and they're like, we have to figure out how to like package this thing. So,
were you familiar at all with League? Were you a League player at the time?
I got into like League. I think my account is number 250.
Wow.
I got into their alphas when we were just sitting around on Ventrilo giving feedback. I got into, like, a friend introduced me to Dota, and like late in its cycle, and then I played a lot of Han, and then when League was coming out, and Andrew Tamit was over at Riot, he was like, hey, you want to come play this thing? And then I kind of got hooked from there. So
the original, I know some people who played in the beta. I don't know if I know anyone who played in the alpha directly, but they have the very cool Rammus summoner icon where it's like, oh, you got masters in beta or whatever it was called back then, top 500 players or whatever. And I'm very jealous of them. And then they have the King Rammus skin, which is coveted.
That's my favorite skin.
It's such a good skin. You could not get away with making that skin.
Yeah, exactly. Such a good IP infringement skin. So.
Yeah. So moving over from Fanbyte to Riot, you said you worked as basically a patch notes writer. I'm sure that wasn't all you did. What other things were you doing on like a day-to-day basis there?
So my main thing was sort of the communications guy on the live design team. I think at the time there weren't many, maybe if any, like people who are just like really deep into the gameplay communications. So specifically, it's this idea of like, you want to, launch a new hero or champion. You want to talk about a seasonal update. You want to talk about these feature updates. Like, one of the things that I think you have to do is obviously deeply understand the product, like the thing that you're selling. And me joining, I think, as someone who's just like really, really deep into the game, I was kind of used as this sort of communications SME for anything to do with like, how do we explain to players this feature? And so I worked on, I think, the first champion updates, like how do you explain why we're even updating Trundle and Sejuani in the first place? Patch notes was like an every 2-week basis. And so that pulse point of how do we like spicy changes, esports changes, whatever, how to explain that. And then also I think I worked on a lot of like patch updates, all of its iterations with, like Morello and Jat talking over gameplay or sitting on a live set, or Patrick Scarborough, Scarazar talking with like a panel, like getting roasted by Scara. I had to host a couple myself. So that was, I think, consumed a lot. And then also, I think I just got brought in on like when we just got yelled at a lot. So something would blow up on Reddit or our forums, and then we would have to huddle up and be like, why are they pissed at us? And part of my job was to be like, okay, this is like the history of that thing and why. And then let's talk about like what an actual solution looks like. What are we doing? How do we talk about that thing? And I think as I kind of grew in seniority at the company, one of the things that I think I got really good at was not about just like, hey, what are you doing? I'll go tell them what they're doing, which I think is what like old school community management is you just bring a list of grievances and you're like, are you fixing this? And then they go, yes. And you go, okay, they're fixing it. It's about
Hey,
like,
everyone, they're fixing it.
yeah, it's actually about like, how are you fixing it? Why are you fixing it? What are your limitations when it comes to fixing it? Like, what are you scared of telling them? What don't you want to tell them? And then sitting down and being like, hey, it sounds like the solution even that you're trying to propose sounds like you're more trying to appeal to the masses as opposed to actually solving the intrinsic problem. Let's talk about the problem. And then let's talk about how we want to talk about the problem. And you don't even need to tell me like what you want to say. I'm just going to translate this conversation to the world. And that kind of became a lot of, I think, the thing that I became good at. I was like kind of like a fixer. It's like, hey, we screwed this thing up because they don't get this. And I would come in and be like, they don't get this because it doesn't make fucking sense. And then we would have to have a conversation about like, well, what are you actually trying to do? And they're like, I'm trying to do this thing. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Why this thing? And then eventually when you really break that whole thing down, you can actually present a really coherent explanation to people, or not. You get punched in the face, which is what we got through with like dynamic queue.
Oh man, yeah, man, I like dynamic queue. I liked a lot of the controversial things that Riot put out and subsequently killed.
I think they were fun. I think they were chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. Chaos is fun sometimes. How did you define legitimate feedback from some of the more just like, I don't want to say it, just like
dumb feedback,
well,
or
just people hating on stuff to hate on things, because especially on Reddit, because I'm sure you're intimately familiar. Reddit can sometimes just be a very counterculture sort of platform to just be like, they hate change, they hate new things, they hate anything perceived as like corporate changes. So how do you work with that platform to be like, deliver actual useful things to the people working on the game?
The most important thing is to figure out worldviews from everyone. Like, it's not just about like, I need you to do a thing. Like I talk about this a lot and it's going to sound really weird, but like in terms of relationships, like when you are in a deep relationship with somebody, it's not about you say like, you need to wash the dishes, you need to do the laundry, you need to do this thing and show up here. It's about like, I care about XYZ. I see the world in this way. And I want to build a life with you. And this sounds really sappy, but like, I want to build a life with you because like, I care deeply about the way that you see the world as well. And game development, when I say it's like, it's hyper collaborative, this is also part of it. It's the relationship that you have with the people who care deeply about your game and play it. And so when they give you feedback, they will talk, yes, like, I want you to do the fucking dishes. I want you to nerf this guy. I think this is busted. But the real value of someone who is actually like not doing the work, but is translating, is like their worldview is this. Like, this is someone who cares deeply about this. They believe that counterplay is sacrosanct. They believe that point and click buttons are skillless, and so therefore you should get them out of the game. They believe all of these things. And then you tell that to a game designer, and a game designer is like, that's a valid belief, but point and click buttons are really important for the longevity of our game. It's like, that's powerful. Hold on to that. Don't ever lose that. But now I will go out and I'll help figure out, how do you like bring that person into the slice of this thing? And so a lot of the times feedback is coming from this place of passion. It needs a lot of filtering, but like, you should just listen to a lot of the reasons, like, why are they saying the things that they're saying? This is why I think, to me, like, really good feedback comes from a place of like, expose your biases first. Tell me like, hey, I think the game should be this. I think that this should be this. I'm like, these are the things that inform why I'm giving you this feedback. And then I'm going to tell you, this really pissed me off. And so it takes a lot of reading, honestly. Like, you have to read a lot and you have to care about how people talk to each other. And so that's the thing that I think is like really valuable to me. Like, I spend every single day basically going through like subreddits, Twitter, random comments. I go through news posts. I go through as much as I can, especially when like really crazy things happen, like things that are really controversial. I want to read as much like just mudslinging as possible, because the thing that it's important to me is what is the worldview that these people are constructing, and what is informing the reasons that they're saying the things that they're saying, because I want to be able to articulate both sides if I can.
That's really fascinating how you put that. So the way that you articulate yourself and the way that you articulate this, it sounds like you always had sort of things in hand and under control. Is there anything that you felt like you had to struggle with at the time? It's just like something that was really difficult for you to come to grips with?
I think there's two things that I constantly have to come to grips with. One is I can't explain away everything. You know, like there's this feeling that like there are certain things that I'm like, oh yeah, we can just go in and we can explain this thing, and people are like, you're an idiot. And I love getting checked by that. It doesn't feel great in the moment, but like in the aftermath, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, I need to work on not my ability to convince people, but my ability to present a coherent worldview that people can actually understand. I think the other thing is honestly like not everybody, like there's business. I think this is just a thing that I need to say is like, especially when it comes to community communications, what I'm able to do or what I'm allowed to do around like translating true relationships is a luxury. There are so many games out there who don't get to build a core audience, who don't get to have an ongoing relationship. And it was such an incredible like boon that I got to do that for 8 years at Riot across multiple products and games and communities. And I was lucky in that like anytime we said something, people paid attention. But like there's this bare minimum like Maslow's hierarchy of awareness that like they have to care first. They have to care and invest in order to have a relationship with you. And that's something I think is really interesting, you know, working in a startup. It's great to hone my chops around like, how do you get people to care? We haven't talked about anything about our game. We haven't like made them care yet. How do I make them care? And I don't want to do it manipulatively. I think that's the thing that scares me the most. I look at a lot of Web3 studios. I think they're making people care by tapping into these really deep emotions of like greed or this wanting to belong. Like QAnon does this really well. It feeds these fantasies of like, I am the only one that sees what's going on. Like that's really scary. And that's like the flip side, I think, of community that is really easy to tap into when you're like your craft is connecting people and helping them feel understood, as you can quickly manipulate that into like making them feel like they have to stay. And so, but I'm learning that like, especially at like a startup like Theorycraft, we need to get people to care, and we have to do it honestly on like a moral line that I have to be really okay with. And so I'm not like crossing any boundaries or whatever, but like I'm trying really fucking hard to make people like give value to the community when we don't have much of value to give. That's why I think we host things like career panels, or I want to like, I'm pushing the devs as much as they can to like, you know, do USC career panels or anything like that. Whatever kind of mentorship we can give, I think that's valuable, and we can always give that. So I'm like, we should just do that.
Yeah, and jumping ahead a little bit from what I was going to say, I actually just wanted to bring this up now because you segued so brilliantly into it. What is the struggle that you have coming from a game like League of Legends at Riot, where it is the most popular game on the planet and has been for a long time? So you're coming into a game that people already care about vehemently to the level of incredible passion that produces some of the best and worst parts of the community. And then you're coming from that to a startup studio, which has very little impact on the sphere yet, because there hasn't been a game yet, at least a publicly announced game or a publicly available game. Like going from those two changes in the field, what was that like?
Ooh, it's fun. I mean, I think I love this in that like you get to build a relationship from the ground up, and you get to really choose the things that are really important. I mean, I think that there are a lot of game studios that, you know, you have to do like kind of unsavory things in order to like growth hack and whatnot. I think that's important. I think that's like a really powerful lesson around like how do you grab attention. Like that's just like a craft of marketing. For us, I think I'm learning not to take anything for granted, which I really appreciate. This idea that like no one cares about you, so how do you make them care in a way that is genuine and authentic? And I think one of the things that's really helpful is we do play tests like as often as we possibly can. And we've been in development for about two and a half years. I've been on a lot of game dev studios. this game has moved the fastest I've ever seen by like 5x, specifically because once you're inside, once you play the game, I think there's something really fun here, and we act on that feedback. And so at the very least, it's like it's taught me like that relationship, you can start it really early. I wish we could talk about our game, but our game is actually very like there's a lot. And I hope that you when you play, like you'll see it's like it's a genre mashup. We're not like at all just saying like we want to make the next great tac shooter. And I think I want to manage those expectations. And also like, information is really precious to us. And so I want to make sure we use it at the right time to grab the most eyeballs. But it's been really fun, I think, just like kind of scrambling. Like I'm like a beggar on the street. Just I'm like, please give me anything. We will give you value. I will say one thing that's kind of shocked me is I genuinely believe that like this team has just like a lot to offer in terms of advice, mentorship, and like there's just like really good insight here. And even still though, I remember at the start of when I joined last year, I was touring a lot of like career panels and like game dev enthusiast studios, and they were all telling me, they're like, we see your team's pedigree, we see like the things they worked on, they've shipped like incredible games, we'll see if people are interested in showing up to like hear about what you're making, see a game in live development. We get like not that many people showing up. And I thought like, look at these people, they shipped Overwatch, they shipped like League of Legends, TFT Legends. These are people who like were on the ground floor. And I'm not saying that to be like arrogant, but I'm like, these are people who have done exceptional things and want to share that. But what I'm hearing kind of out in the world is like the students are kind of overwhelmed. They're just getting newsletters and panels and shit just like yeeted at them, and they're at home and they're just like, they don't know how to like prioritize it all. They don't realize like, this is valuable, this is less valuable. They don't know how to actually be like, it's just like, it's really overwhelming. And so that's something that I'm trying to figure out. And that's why we're hosting them on our Discord, is I'm like, if we're consistent about this, if we just create a space where people can come in, maybe over time we'll kind of build this reputation of like, hey, these guys just like care, there's value here. They'll host these things even if there's like 10 people, but like hopefully we can actually start to build a community of people who actually care about game development, who care about the game we're making. But I don't want to lure them in around like this false sense of, like you could get rich, or we're going to like watch a movie together. I think there are some communities that are really great at that. Like I think there are some really cozy communities, but like it's like that's not our vibe. Our vibe is we're going to make a great competitive game, and we're going to build it with people in the open.
Yeah, and speaking from an outsider's perspective, but somebody who does create content in like the educational game development sphere, it is just incredibly difficult. I think that's one of the things that is hardest to come to grips with, and it sort of echoes what we were talking about in game dev in general. Input in does not guarantee input out. Like hours spent on your production, on your script writing, on your scheduling, on your marketing, anything that you put in is not going to necessarily result in people coming down. And what you said is 100% true. There's just so much out there for people to consume. And this is one of the issues that I have with sort of the content creation market in general, where there's just so much that it's past the point of oversaturation. It's to the point where the market of people who are consuming this content and the market of people who are producing this content is like reaching.
It's gradually,
which is not where you want to be in that situation. Which is why you see so many people who are famous, who have made it big. They started out early. They started out really early, and they've built that over 10 years, 20 years. And then they're staying on top, and it's very, 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 very difficult to peel people away from that base and sort of be like, hey, I'm working ridiculously hard to make this. Want to pay attention to this maybe? And they're like, no, but I really want to pay attention to this more. This is what I've been paying attention to for 10 years. Yeah. So disrupting that complacency in the community is very difficult. And I think the if anyone's listening to this or watching this and needed some motivation to really get started with their project, that is it can be a very demoralizing truth. but I think it really just gives you more of an incentive to differentiate yourself from the other people, because the one thing that you can do as a new person in this field, whatever you're doing, is you can, one, differentiate yourself, but you have to differentiate yourself in a way that's attractive to the either the consumer, the player, whatever you're making. So it's can be helpful, like you said, to make like, oh, we're making the next Overwatch, we're making the next League of Legends. Like you may get some eyes on that based off of people who like those games, but at the end of the day, unless your game is just so much better, unless your content is just so much better than those old pieces of content, then why are people going to like quit consuming those old pieces of content and move on to your content?
Right.
So having that core idea behind it is so difficult. And I think as a podcaster, as somebody who's making this, that was just something that I accepted. Like, I don't make this show to be like the most popular game dev podcast out there, which I'm sure, I don't even know what the bar is. I'm not even sure what my competition is. I make this show because I like talking to people in game dev. I like talking to people who are at the top of their game, who are making incredible things and really just putting passion into it, because they have such insane, awesome perspectives on what they do. And I think you really don't get that in other roles. Like, you'll talk to somebody who is head of community at like a pharmaceutical company, if that is a role that exists, and they could be passionate about insulin or something like that, but it's not going to be the same level of engagement and really just passion that you see in game dev.
Yeah.
So I love that you have come to that conclusion with Theorycraft, where you're like, hey, we're putting this value out there. If people want that value, they're free to come and take it. But we're not going to be trying to manipulate people into joining our community and for something that it's not going to be like, that's not who we are.
Yeah.
It's just really very interesting perspective that I don't think people can really see from the outside unless they've experienced something like that.
It's hard, if a tree falls in the forest, no one hears, that kind of thing. If a game with a great team that we think is a lot of fun, develops in isolation and no one hears, like, at the end of the day, like, that is just like a truth. It's like, if no one's paying attention, you can't do the things that you want to do. And so we have to learn how to just bootstrap this whole entire thing together. And I don't think that's like a bad thing. It's just like, that's just like the nature of the world. And I'm glad I get to do that alongside a thing I really believe in. I think if I had to do this in a thing I didn't believe in, that would probably be a whole entire different issue. So
yeah, you'd have to be very, 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 very motivated by something to get
Correct.
that to work. Jumping back a little bit before we move on, because I'd love to talk about Theorycraft. I actually have a whole section on that, but I just wanted to finish this last section real quick. After Riot, you left Riot, you moved on to Improbable. Let's just talk a little bit about that, and then we can move on to Theorycraft.
So Improbable,
yeah, what attracted you? You already spoke a little bit about like how Riot had kind of shifted away from some of the values that you currently had. What attracted you towards Improbable?
I think Improbable was interesting just from like a fresh start, getting to work with, shout out to Chris Enoch, he's their head of publishing over there, and Chris Enoch was the VP of publishing at Riot for I want to say like 10, 11, 12 years. And he was just like a leader that like believed in me and was responsible for a lot of my career growth at Riot. And so when I was looking for something new, specifically, I think to build something that I thought was value aligned, I really wanted to work with him. And also, like, big shout out to Herman Narula, who is the CEO of Improbable. The company is, Herman is crazy. He's just like got so much energy. But he has so Improbable, just as an FYI, has switched over actually to like Web3. Specifically, they're building the metaverse for the Bored Ape Yacht Club. And I know that there's a lot of opinions in this space, but one of the things that I think about Herman, particularly as a CEO, is like he's a true believer. He has always been a true believer in the metaverse, the possibilities of MMO scale technology, and like how we connect in digital spaces. And that's why he built Improbable in the first place. And so that's actually what attracted me to Improbable. Specifically, they were building games that they were like, we want to build games that connect on social spaces. And those two games were, one was Scavengers, and then the other one is Nightingale. And Nightingale, I think, has shifted into being like, a survival RPG, but I think like aesthetically, it's just really cool. I love that team over there. And both these games, I was like, you know what, sounds really interesting, and we get to build a whole entire like go-to-market team, publishing team, community team from the ground up. I just wanted to try it, and so I think going over to Improbable was just like, it's fun, and I think the reason it pushed me was, I kind of had this feeling of like, if you don't do something that scares you, you'll blink, and like 6 months have passed, a year has passed, and you won't wish that you did that one thing, but like a year will still have gone by. And especially coming out of launching Valorant, which I still like think was just like one of the most fun experiences of my life. I was like, I think I will get comfortable if I stay here, and I think I will blink and be here another year, another 2 years. And so it's time to like move cities, basically. I think the thing that really convinced me was when I graduated in Vancouver, and then I had no money, and a friend who like graduated in Toronto was like, I'm gonna sublet my place for like a couple of months. You get to like move here cheap. You don't get to see the place, but like at the very least, like you get a base. And I was like, all right, fuck it. And so I just like up and went to Toronto, and that was like the biggest growth experience for me. Just like you leave your whole safety network into a city that you've like never been to, and you just have to figure it out. And I was like, I think I have to push myself into doing this. And so I just really enjoyed actually just being at Improbable. I think it was just like such a like fresh breath of air. And we launched Scavengers. It did great in terms of like opening numbers, and then kind of credit out, because I think it just didn't have like the retention that it needed. But it just taught me a lot, I think, about like how do you work at a tech company, how do you work at like a large, like a lot of my team was in Europe as well, and so it was like just like really interesting. I think I learned just from like a texture perspective, I think, of life.
Yeah, that's incredibly motivating what you said about just like, and obviously this isn't the goal for everyone, but not getting too comfortable in where you are, because I actually had a really similar experience for my current role right now. I was living in a very small town in North Carolina, and I had options in that town. I had options for my career, but none of them would really result in like a huge change, like a reinventing myself or changing my life up. And then when I got offered this position in Los Angeles, I was like, man, moving from small town North Carolina to one of the biggest cities in the country, that's going to be a big change. So I moved, no support network. I didn't even have a place to stay.
Hell yeah.
My place fell through. It was a nightmare at the time, but it was, I'm very glad that I did it, because it has really changed my life towards, being outside of my comfort zone and really having to scramble or die, basically.
Yeah.
And of course, when COVID hit, I got that job right in 2019. When COVID hit, they're like, "Hey, you can work remote now, so you don't have to live in LA anymore." I'm like, "All right, I'm moving back to." I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, which is a nice happy medium between
in between, yeah,
small town USA and Los Angeles. Which Los Angeles was not the city for me in terms of the vibe and the culture. It was just very, very fast paced and busy and stuff like that. So I learned that about myself as well, which was valuable.
I definitely think the idea that you learn about yourself is just so it's it's not, maybe it's not for everyone, but like knowing myself, I learn best not by like sitting and examining and meditating. I learn by like throwing my ass into things and then being like, wow, I did not like that, but just trying. And so I think that's definitely been very helpful.
It's so easy to stay in your comfort zone and just really do the things, eat the things you like, do the things you like, be the person you like no changes whatsoever. And I mean, that can work. There's no reason to say that can't work for you. I mean, if that's your goal, go ahead. But I think there's always been something like deep down in people that say like, hey, make that change. Those intrusive thoughts where it's like, hey, take that jump, do that, take that job in another city, take that,
do that thing, eat that thing.
Eat that thing, and you hate it, and you're like, okay, I learned I don't like that thing. But making that change is scary and it's difficult. But if that's for you, then give it a shot because it can turn out to be really valuable.
Hell yeah.
Something else that you said about like the Web3 environment, and you said there's a lot of opinions about stuff out there, and I really like the way you phrase that, because like obviously it can be a very controversial point of view. Like people have very strong opinions on things from one perspective or the other, and I think what really lends value to something like that is that they're willing to go against the grain for something that they believe in, even if it ends up not being true one way or the other. They can take that risk and really try something very different, because it is very, very different from some of the things that have been like established in the field. So I will always applaud the people who are willing to try something different and sort of put their neck out there for something that may not end up working out at the end of the day, but it's
That's
very
the thing.
exciting to me.
That's the thing that I think is particularly true in games. Like games, like people will say this, games are actually inherently very, very risk averse. People like just building the whole entire thing, the engine, the game, the live service, whatever it is, shipping the box is like, it's so expensive that you need to like get some guarantee. And gamers are so fickle and they change in taste, and the industry and the career changes all the time. And so it's this idea of like, can you guarantee they'll love this game? And how do you guarantee it? Well, they love this game, so they might love this game. And so I think that this is actually the thing that I hear a lot from particularly CEOs of companies and founders that I'm so impressed by, is every single one of them, when journalists, because I sit in on a lot of interviews with them, journalists are like, what's the thing that people were telling you when you were starting out? And they were like, everyone was telling me I was crazy. And conviction. You need so much conviction to start a game studio. You need so much conviction to just like push through and create something new. And I will just like always respect anyone who takes a run at that, because it takes like just this incredible fortitude of shrugging off the haters to just ship the thing. And so I'm like, hell yeah, like do it. Even if it's crazy, even if like it does something weird, like it moves the conversation forward.
Yeah, and it's so easy for people to leverage hindsight and look back on projects that may have failed and be like, man, that was dumb idiot. Why would he ever think that would work? But like you said, like so many great projects and companies have started because that 1 in 1,000 person, 1 in a million person was able to stick with their guns and really hone that idea to be like, use their vision to make something different. And it's frustrating when people don't at least respect the idea of it, even if they don't respect the motivation or the methods that they're using. If they don't at least respect the idea of the innovation, I definitely don't appreciate that. And it's really easy to be negative about things.
It's very easy.
Very easy to be negative about things, especially when you perceive it as something that goes against your personal beliefs.
Right.
So having an open mind on stuff, even when it seems to be not your personal worldview or your even a larger community's personal worldview, is a very valuable asset to, I think, having at least a balanced perspective on stuff like that.
And I will say, like,
okay.
I'm assuming that anyone listening, and actually the second thing would also be like, I may be running out of time, I gotta go make dinner, but for anyone who wants to work in this field, particularly about communications and community, this is like the thing that you need to have, is both the ability to have an open mind, but also the means to respect and articulate other perspectives, and give them like respect and charitable interpretations. Because if you can make any worldview make sense, then you can make your worldview make sense. But you have to like really love and appreciate that there are people out there who have very different worldviews from you that are informed by very different circumstances. And by going out and being able to understand like what's informing that rather than dismissing it, you just like make your craft so much better. And I can't think of any craft actually that doesn't get better by doing this. But I think communications, especially, like, do this, learn this. Don't just like be like, I'm a player and therefore I think that all players should think this way. Challenge yourself, push yourself, because that's just like how you get better.
For sure. So I don't know how much time you have left. We had actually been talking for a lot longer than I realized. We had such a great
Sorry
discussion
about
about.
that.
No. I mean, I will never. I'll never be unhappy that we had too much things to talk about. If you didn't have a lot of time left today to finish the questions, we could either turbo through some of them right now, or if you wanted, you could come back on maybe next week and we could sort of revisit some of these topics and then really dive more into Theorycraft.
I'm happy either way. I mean, it depends on like how much content you think I'm good for or not good for. If you'd like, I think the main thing that I would like to do is definitely shill a little bit more of Theorycraft just in this moment. And so what I can do is probably, how about this? We can do this again at some point in time when you're like, hey, everyone's not sick of you anymore. And I'd like to shill Theorycraft specifically in that, if it's okay, if I can go into my spiel.
Absolutely, good.
Would be one, please sign up. Like, actually, like join us on Discord. I think that's probably the main thing. Just like join us on Discord, Theorycraft, discord.gg/Theorycraft. We are hosting a Getting into Game Design career panel actually just tomorrow. And we plan to just continue rolling these things, talking about anything, like pretty much any topic that people are interested in. Two, we are playtesting as frequently as we possibly can. If you want to sign up, you can sign up on our website. Just click on the community tab. And then we're accepting just like generally players. If you're interested and not in North America, then just reach out to me and I'll probably just get you in. We run these playtests, we're hoping like, maybe monthly, and we just take feedback, we iterate, we evolve, we just try to make this game as fun as possible. And that's like the main thing, I think. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone. We would just like love to have more people in here. We invite like hundreds at a time, so we're kind of burning through a lot of playtesters just to show them the game.
So that the game design panel was on December 7th. What time?
At 3 p.m. Pacific time.
Okay, December 7th, 3 p.m. Pacific time on discord.gg/Theorycraft. Check it out. I think the overlap between people who are interested in this podcast and people who are interested in stuff like that is probably fairly high. So hopefully you get to hear this in time or see this in time and join in there. But you said you do that sort of thing fairly often, so
we're trying to scale them up into like at least maybe like once a month, maybe once every couple of weeks if we can. So yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely check that out. And then I'm personally signed up for the playtest. I'm very excited for it. Is the date public? The next playtest date?
The next playtest dates are December 15th and 16th. And so I'm still sending out invites because I'm still trying to figure out like a new flow where we hack together. So sign up and then maybe I'll randomly select you. We try to keep like a handful of people, like a group that we're like, they're interested. We invite them in waves. And so we also have unlimited friend referrals once you're on the inside. So
maybe I'll refer some friends.
Hell
into
yeah.
It. Yeah. So I had a whole page of questions about Theorycraft and stuff, but I know that you're running out of time. So I'd love to revisit these with you sometime. Maybe in the near future if you've got time. But let's just go over our main takeaways and wrapping up so I can let you go make dinner. So these are questions I like to ask every guest on the show who comes on and sort of like gauge the different answers and see if we can learn from them. So what are some of the skills and habits that you focused on and you recommend to people wanting a similar role? We've talked a bit about that, but elevator pitch.
I think the main thing is learn to analyze communities. Specifically, like don't just form your opinion and then walk away holding that opinion. Try to challenge yourself by digging into communities and alternative perspectives that disagree with you and try to understand why they believe the things that they believe. I think that's just really crucial because that'll just help you understand when you get into a really sticky situation, you have crises to deal with, you have PR stuff, whatever. It's this idea of like people believe otherwise. Why do they believe that? You need to have the skill set to do that. And that's like a journalistic background, but like hone that. Anytime you see a developer getting into trouble with something, go figure out why, and then go figure out deeper. Like go read every single comment you can and construct as many like different arguments around why you think it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Okay. That's fantastic advice. What is one thing that you wish you could go back in time and tell young Chris who's in college? Like, this is what you need to do to become successful.
Honestly, I wouldn't tell him anything. I'd be like, fucking deal with it, man. Like, I think I'm a bit of a hard ass. I think maybe I would say like, hey, like it's gonna suck before it gets better. Like it's gonna really suck. But even then, I actually don't even think I would do that because I think like it's part of the journey. Like if somebody came, sorry, I'm playing too hard into the metaphor, but if I came back to my future self and was like, it's gonna get better, I'm like, that's already given me some kind of extrinsic thing. I'm like, really, old me, he had everything he needed. He just needed to push. And so like if someone came and said like it gets better, like he didn't need that. What he needed to do was just like get grit.
That's a different answer than what I've heard previously. I love it. We've talked about this too. You did a great job of covering some of my questions before I could even ask them. But dream job if not working in games.
Book publishing, definitely, or journalism. I think journalism, just like both of those things, the reason just being I always want to like hear from different perspectives and like people who like really also want to connect with the world. And I think journalists and book editors specifically also work in that space. But I'm kind of like I think in my dream job.
For sure. And then last question, who are some of the people that inspire and motivate you to be a better person?
Honestly, I think there's people who inspire me to be a better person. It's just like I think people who are my friends and my SO and things like that. I think just like as long as I always want to cultivate people who like really push me in that space, like I guess morally. People I admire and I grow from. Honestly, a lot of CEOs. Like I think there's been like an insane amount of game studios coming out that I just like really want to give a shout out to. Like Treehouse Games, like Michael Chu, Andreas Sapensis, Brian Chen are like, you know, creating a great social game, it sounds like. Elodie Games with David Banks, Christina Norman, Bonfire Games, Min Kim, Rob Pardo, Frost Giant, Second Dinner, Singularity 6. I worked with Anthony Leong, big fan of him. Hidden Leaf, who just like launched Fangs. And Bao is their CEO. Like I'm friends with him, play a lot of games with him. Congratulations also to like Omega Strikers and Odyssey. Like I think Henkel, Dax, Decap, Eric, like they were kind of one of the first studios to kind of strike out from Riot. And always had a lot of faith in them. I think their game is a lot of fun, so I hope people continue to play that. But I'm like, these are people who like walked away from the comfort of Riot and Blizzard and just said like, fuck it, I'll do it myself. And I think that's like really crazy.
Yeah,
so.
that's definitely, it takes a lot of courage to do. It takes that driving factor where it's like doing something that's a risk, but you believe that you need to do it for that change in your life. Well, thanks, Chris, for coming on the show. Thank you so much. We've talked for about maybe an hour and 45 minutes now, and we didn't even cover all of our topics. So,
sorry, like I'm very verbose.
I always love to have more content than not enough. But hopefully, we can have you back on the show very soon, and we can cover the rest of this. But until then, you can go ahead and follow Chris on Twitter at PWYFF. Don't forget the W; that'd be very embarrassing. And check out Theorycraft Games. Check out the Loki community site, discord.gg/Theorycraft. And what is Theorycraft.com or Theorycraft.inc?
Theorycraftgames.com.
Theorycraftgames.com. Check it out there. Sign up for the playtests. They're going to be very fun. I'm very excited to join in. Anything else you want to plug?
That's about it. Come sign up. Come playtest with us. Come join our community.
For sure. And if you like the podcast, if you like the show, you can watch us live at twitch.tv/Nighthawk20000. And if you can't watch us live, you can watch us on YouTube as well. All the VODs go up there pretty much same day, youtube.com/Nighthawk20000. And if you don't want to watch the show, you can always listen on all major audio platforms like Spotify, Google, Anchor, and whatever else, Stitcher. There's a ton of them out there now. We're on all of them, I'm pretty sure. And if we're not, give me a shout and I'll make sure they're on there.
So many
if you want
of
to
them.
follow the show, give us a rating. That helps out. I do this for fun. There's no obligation from listeners. I'm not trying to be a big podcast star, so don't feel like the need that you have to push it or anything. But if you want to help us out, join the Discord, tell your friends, just share the news. It's a fun show and I really enjoy doing it. And thank you so much for spending your time and listening to me and Chris talk about games.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a fantastic interview. Really appreciate it.